So like what I'm saying is, I can't be saved. Like my salvation isn't working out if I'm just only focused on myself and my own salvation. And at the same time, I'm also not doing any good for the rest of the world if I'm neglecting my own salvation. So it's like those things, I don't know, it's a mystery, but I hope this makes sense. It's like, that's the thing that's, anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is that your Christianity can't possibly work on all of those levels if it just keeps breaking up. Because how are you going to redeem the institutions around you? Like we're talking about education. How are you going to have any answers to the problems in education if you're dealing with a huge institution, but your institutions are just in shambles? It's like this, and this is part of the thought process that leads me to realizing it's like, no, the church has to be an institution that exists on earth. It can't be this teaching of, oh, it's the invisible church that's just all true believers are united spiritually into the church, but it's not an organization with actual buildings and people and leadership and hierarchies and all that. That's just some kind of.
Well, yeah, that would suggest that there is no body to the church, and if there's no body, then it can't do things.
Welcome to The Sacred Life. I'm your host, Aaron Beachy, and we are coming to you today from David's barn, actually.
What?
We have with us again today, of course, David Baylor and John Baylor, and today is just kind of a little bit of a life update video for the three of us, and I'm gonna let John get us started here.
Filming in the barn has a lot to do with the life update. We got some questions and comments from listeners in the past saying, hey, I love what you guys are doing and all this interest that you're taking in other Christian traditions and Orthodoxy in particular. And I wonder, what do your churches think of this? And, well, this is what what our churches think of it. We've lost not only our filming location, but for Aaron as his position, pastor position in his church, and we'll get to David, I guess, after a bit. But
yeah, if you guys didn't know, Aaron was a pastor in his church.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should start there. Probably, I don't think I ever was real open about my position in the church that I've been part of for many years. My dad started a church about 10 years ago, and probably I have not done my due diligence in remembering exactly the year, but probably about 5 years ago I was ordained as a deacon in the church, and then in the fall of last year, 2023, my dad as the lead pastor passed away, and in the spring of 2024, I was ordained as the lead pastor, or as in the Mennonite church, it would be the bishop. And as all of you that have been following our podcast know that we are very serious about ancient Christianity, apostolic Christianity, and as the pastor, I continued my pursuit of that. Did not necessarily try to push that on my parishioners or anything. It's pretty traditional Mennonite church, I guess, if you are Mennonite and know what that looks like. So it was more of just, with the podcast, kind of getting what we're finding through our search and things like that out there, and kind of incorporated just a few little things into our services, as far as a gospel reading each Sunday, maybe we would kneel for the Lord's Prayer together each Sunday, and that was about it. And didn't really receive any pushback. I actually heard some positive comments about that, but over the course of, a few months, we included that in our practice. And about the beginning of July, my life started to change a little bit. I met a dear woman who was the circumstances surrounding our relationship beginning were through my mother and some of her closest people that kind of put us together. And suffice it to say, that relationship has flourished, and we're fiancés now and getting married later this year. But that happened, and then also my grandmother, who had been dealing with congestive heart failure, progressively got worse and worse, became bedridden near that time as well. Over the course of things, she passed away not too long after that. So the timeline goes kind of like this. My relationship was beginning. My grandmother was on her deathbed, and as this was happening, I was made aware of some dissatisfaction within my congregation of how I was doing things. Made aware that some of my parishioners were not happy with some of the things we were talking about on the podcast, and I did not really have the time or the ability, with all that was going on in my life, with the relationship beginning or my grandmother passing, to really dedicate a lot of time to it.
And along with that, it's not a full-time pastorate. You
Right.
work in construction jobs.
Yeah,
so-
I'm a lay pastor.
Right, yeah,
I'm a
yeah,
lay
yeah.
pastor. So, it was just one of those things where it just, with my grandmother passing almost nearly a year after my father passing, it was something that my family definitely needed my attention, and, I needed to be there for them through that time.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out Aaron is the oldest son in his family, so that's,
Yeah.
and it's a large family too, so a lot of responsibility and a lot of need.
Yeah. So there was not a lot of communication about how people felt about this podcast, or the few little things that I had started to include in our services. And I can take some responsibility for that and say that I didn't necessarily consult anybody, my elders, on the gospel reading or anything like that. I probably should have. But long story short, basically, I don't want to go into the details of things that were said or said by certain people or anything like that. But long story short is we had a meeting, and it was just made clear that to continue as pastor, they would have wished for me to end my pursuit of ancient Christianity or apostolic Christianity. And at that point, the decision was made pretty easily for me to just simply resign, because, it's pretty plainly obvious, in our pursuit of things and looking into things, that, what the apostles left for us is something that we've kind of lost in our modern era, and we're trying to reclaim that. We're trying to find it again.
I want to say just a little bit, I guess, play devil's advocate a little bit and say, like the way you phrased it, I'm not trying to pick on you, is, wishing you would not pursue ancient and apostolic Christianity. Knowing these men, like, I'm sure that's not like the way they were looking at it. Like, to them, it seems like, oh, you're going after these things that are, we don't believe that they're right.
Right.
So it's not, yeah.
Yeah, and I will caveat all that. I will just add to what David said there and say that I myself pretty much looked at things exactly the same way they are looking at them, and we're looking at them in the situation that we found ourselves in about 4 or 5 years ago. That's where I would have been at as well. So I don't fault anybody. I went through, it was a very hard time losing my father as the pastor. of the church, and it was one of those things where those dear folks that are there, that were part of the church, were hugely important to me through the loss of my father, and were hugely supportive, and very supportive, very loving, and encouraged me in amazing ways, and gave me, in some cases, the courage to go on. So there's no animosity on my part whatsoever. But that's where I find myself today. Yes, in a barn,
Just homeless.
yeah, with the birds and yeah.
I do wish I'd had the opportunity to make some kind of public defense of you.
It's okay.
Well, only to make the point that what we're digging into here and what you're doing in your personal life, because like it's not just like a theological discussion, for example, of what's the role of icons in the life of the Christian, but we're talking also about your personal prayer practices, and if it's just in the realm of ideas, then I think there's less of a defense that can be made of you. Like, hey, I just think this stuff is interesting, so I'm going to start teaching this stuff. But when it comes to something like, this is something that I started in my prayer practice, and it has made my life richer, and it's helped me to draw closer to God and grow in my faith, and in the midst of these difficult times that you're talking about, to be growing in my faith, and these practices being a part of that. Well, you can't dismiss that on an idea level anymore. Now to dismiss that, it's like you're attacking someone's sincere effort to walk closely with God in their day-to-day life. So in terms of defensive view, that's the message that I would most want to present to the church, is that, like, this isn't some crazy stuff. This is somebody who's praying sincerely.
Yeah.
This is part of it.
Yeah, and like I would add to, like, praying sincerely, but like seeking the truth and seeking God with humility.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's not an easy thing to pin down, even exactly what that means, but part of what it means is being willing to accept, I've been told and I've been taught all of these things, and I don't want to just, throw it all out. But is it possible that not everything that I think I know is right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Has there been this telephone game where something got passed down to me wrong, or has there been an issue where somebody along the line misinterpreted something, and there's always that danger, and like it takes a certain amount of courage to be willing to even ask those questions.
Yeah. Well, and it is humbling to, especially as someone who has been, for myself, having been pretty heavily involved in the church that I grew up in, and then the church that my dad started. I've been very heavily involved since I was a late teen. And it is very humbling to look at things and realize that there might be some things missing from the theology and doctrines that we have nowadays. And that's not a condemnation of anyone, but we can look around us and see that there's gaping holes in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we are suffering as a culture, as a church, and as people because of it. And so, it's a hard pill to swallow for some people. It's been a hard pill for me to swallow. There were years that, the church that I was part of, most of my own family walked away from it because they were not finding answers in things. And I went from being resentful and, upset and thinking, well, why would they do that? Why are they doing this? To realizing that I needed to look in the mirror. The church needs to look in the mirror and see what's missing. And so that's the perspective I bring, as being part of, heavily involved in the church, and then part of the pastorate in the church and things like that, is you can choose to look at people and fault them for what they've done, or you can choose to really, as I said, for the church to look in the mirror and see itself and see what's lacking. And there is a lot lacking.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the interest in Orthodoxy in particular is that there are certain problems in the West and in Western culture. And that's not to say Western culture is bad and evil to the core, but well, I was talking with my students about epic literature, and epic literature is like it's the literature of the older guys telling the stories to young guys and saying, hey, you're a man now, and this is what it means to be a man. And we say they represent the ideal of the culture, but that's what that means. It means older guys telling younger guys what it means to be a man.
Right.
And in epic literature, you'll always have not only the ideal, but you'll have the place where the ideal breaks down. There's some way where if you live up to this ideal, that will bring its own set of problems. And you need to understand that. Part of being a man also is understanding that.
Yeah.
Like there's not an ideal way of living your life that will have zero consequences.
Right.
And so the same thing with what I say about the West is like, I'm not saying that it's bad, but I'm saying that if you live up to the Western ideals, then there are some problems and there are some sicknesses and diseases that come with that. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to have what is almost like a newfound connection to the Orthodoxy that the West was basically unaware of it, mm-hmm. and now we can see it. And I think what people see in Orthodoxy is the antidote to all these Western diseases of the mind.
Yeah.
And so for me, a lot of my interest is how can this make my own tradition healthier than what it is,
right.
And approaching people who are very different than you with love and with humility
and respect.
Yes, right.
Respect.
And when you do, like, you gain from that. You overcome your own problems when you can see the good that's in somebody who has a different set of problems and has a different set of virtues than you.
Right.
And so it is disappointing that for me this is a kind of ecumenical project with this idea of fostering love and humility and respect, and then that it leads to division, I suppose, is inevitable, but
Right.
still is unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's like there's, like you say, ecumenical, and like there's ecumenical, and then there's ecumenism, which like seems like the same thing, but it's not. Like, oh, we all have our differences, but we can just, all agree, we worship the same God and serve the same Christ, so, we can just love each other despite, like, obviously we would still love each other, but like ecumenical, at the end of the day, doesn't mean you just overlook everything.
Well, I mean,
brush it under the rug.
It means different things. It can mean that, but in our private conversations, at least, we've tried to define, like, when we talk about ecumenical, what do we mean? Because we don't want to mean this.
Right. Yeah, and that's I guess
we don't want to mean this, like, can't we all just get along and love each other?
Right.
Kind of thing. But I think again, I mean, just as I phrase it, like, I think there are specific things that we can draw from other traditions that will help us because we have problems.
Well, and John, what you said there, and Dave, we need to let David share a little bit of his story too, but.
Well, actually, where John's going with, if he's going, it's a nice segue.
What you said there in describing what we don't want ecumenical to mean is we all just need to get along and love each other. That's actually one of the biggest Western problems.
Mm-hmm.
That might be one of the best descriptions of Western.
Well,
thought.
and also in Western culture, a lot of what that means is let's just let go of our traditions and not have them anymore. And we're sort of ambivalent about whether other people should let go of their traditions or not, but sort of generally it's okay if other people have traditions, but it's not okay if Westerners have traditions. And that just sort of like abandonment of your foundation is not, it sort of actually makes you the kind of person who can't even be in relation, or the kind of like your tradition can't stand in relation to other traditions if you release you,
Yeah.
if you have no tradition.
Right, it's like, I mean, we're gonna have like a whole in-depth discussion on this very topic at some point, but, it's like, there's this sense that people have that, oh, any tradition is bad and evil because Jesus criticized traditions. It's like, well, it's a pretty lousy reading of the gospel for one thing, but also, like, if you live in the real world, you realize pretty quickly that tradition is actually the thing that holds society and even like your own life together.
Yeah.
It's like now there's a false tradition. I mean, like the extreme example being paganism. Like paganism is a tradition that held pagan societies together, but it was also evil and like destructive to the people in it. So like, yeah, anyway, we don't want to go too far down that line. It's just pointing out like this kind of relativism
Yeah, right,
is
right,
just like it ends up eating itself.
right. Yeah,
Um,
I think there's a type of ecumenism that is not
Yeah.
like postmodern relativism, like
Right.
where again it's only valuable if you can still have a tradition and if you can still have an identity. Because if you don't get to have an identity, then again you can't stand in relationship to other people who do have an identity.
Yeah. So this kind of, I'll use this to kind of transition into me, like where I'm at. That you kind of have to step back and ask, what is actually the end goal of your ecumenical movement? And like the bad kind of ecumenism that we're talking about, the end goal of it is just like, oh, we all just agree to get along and agree to disagree, basically.
I hate that.
But like the right kind of, I don't know, I hate to use the word ecumenism. It has a very negative connotation for a lot of people, but like the right kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, ecumenism is like the church being functionally one, functionally united. So it's not like, I don't know, like there has to be this concept that, the church is actually a real thing that actually exists. And so if I'm, like I said, this is kind of describing my own personal process here. Like if I'm trying to bring ancient Christianity back into my life or into my church, like I'm recognizing the end goal of that actually winds up being to be reunited with the ancient church. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's led me to the place where I feel like I don't know if it's actually going to be possible to take an organization that exists and fix it. And like, I don't like that answer. I don't want that to be true. But it's just like, people have been trying that for 500 years and it hasn't worked. And I think that's part of this broader movement that's going on in the Christian West right now is a lot of people are kind of coming to the same conclusion that I have come to, which is that, maybe I'm running down the wrong trail trying to fix this over here when Christ Church actually exists over here. I don't know, like, what all the implications in that are for for the Mennonite churches, for the Protestant churches, for the Catholic churches, and all of these people, if I'm saying that Christ Church that exists over here is the Orthodox Church. It's like, I don't think that means, oh, these people are all like evil bad guys and we should turn our backs on them. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, I guess to get to the point, where I'm at now is I'm actually coming into the Orthodox Church. At the time of recording this, it'll be probably a few weeks' time until I'm officially a catechumen. And that's something that, like, like a year ago, if you would have said, oh, this is where you're going to be at next year, I've been like, no, it's not. That's not my goal. But that's how it wound up. And so probably let's back up a little bit and say how it wound up in that place. And I want to be careful how I present this, because I don't want to come out here and criticize a bunch of people. But I do think, like, the best way to put it is kind of some things that have already been said, just being tired of a system that doesn't work. And being tired of not actually having answers for real problems in your life and in the world around you. Then just also just like being tired of this cycle that the American church in particular seems to be caught in, which is that you and I have a difference of opinion and there's no way to resolve that. And so the end result is you're going to go and have your church and I'm going to go and have mine. And the thing that divides us might be really small. I might be convinced that it's a big thing, but it's probably not. And we're probably both off track. But it's just like this endless cycle of just churches breaking apart. And I'm not going to go into detail on this, but that happened in the church that I was in. And for me, it was just like, it happened in the church I grew up in.
And you're talking very recently. I mean,
Yes,
what's your,
very
your
recently.
time frame here?
Yeah, like basically like since the last time we recorded videos, basically. I mean, it was kind of going on at that time, but hadn't come to a head. And like that, like I said, that happened in the church me and John grew up in, and that's happened in all kinds of churches, Protestant, Mennonite, whatever it would be.
It happened in the church that I grew
Yeah,
up
and it
in.
happened in the church Aaron grew up in, and I just like,
And it happened at that church before you grew up in.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's like, there's a lot of details I'm leaving out. Part of the reason is because I don't want to point the finger at this person or this group of people or something like that. There's a lot of things that happen along the way. But eventually just coming to the place where it's just like, I don't know, man, I'm just kind of tired of this. In contrast, here is the Orthodox Church. And I can pick up a book written 1,500 years ago. Like, this is not hyperbole, like this is the literal truth. I can pick up a book written 1,500 years ago by an Orthodox saint, and he's describing the teachings of the church and the practices of the church. And it's exactly the same as what's happening today. And like, for all intents and purposes, they've never really had a split, like other than, I guess, the Bishop of Rome splitting away, but that's a whole different story. My point in that is just looking at this and saying, I'm tired of the divisiveness that's going on over here where I've been. And in contrast, here's something that I know 100 years from now, it's going to be the same as it is today, because it's been the same for as long as anybody can tell. And then just also the fact that I look at that and say, even if we're just saying the last 500 years of the Orthodox Church, it's been consistent, taught the same things, no Protestants can say that. Like, not a single group of Protestants. So like, take the Lutherans, for example. Lutherans today are very, very different from the Church of Martin Luther. The Reformed churches of Europe in, John Calvin's line, it's like they're nothing like John Calvin's church. And just, on and on, like even the Roman Catholic Church is not the same as the Roman Catholic Church at the Council of Trent. But like, here's something I know it's not going anywhere. And for me, it's just like, yeah, I'm tired of the instability, and here's something that's stable. And I don't think that kind of stability is natural either. And I guess that's part of the reason why it's like, okay, I might not understand all the things that they do, all the things that people say. I might not understand all the theology and all the doctrine and stuff like that, but you know what? For all of these other reasons, I can be okay with that. Because I feel like this wouldn't have happened if God wasn't in it.
I think actually I would disagree with you a little bit on that, just to say that I think if you study cultures historically, then you see actually stability. There is something very natural about stability, and especially if you're looking at prehistoric cultures, people without writing. Then you can see periods lasting thousands of years where their lifestyle doesn't change in any meaningful ways.
Well, you're just trying to undermine my whole.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying. Again, I said there are certain consequences to living up to the Western ideal, and part of the Western ideal is innovation. And you celebrate something. Well, this is like, as I say that, I'm thinking of like the book of Acts characterizes the philosophers of Athens by saying they wanted nothing more than to see or hear some new thing.
Right.
Which is just wonderful for a characterization of philosophy in Athens.
Right.
But it's all, well, you could say
Just like
Athens,
the best-
Athens defines the Western ideal.
Yeah, and it's like
and
the
the
best-
Western ideal is that same thing. Like, we just want something that's new.
Right.
We celebrate people, even when we look back on people that accomplished something. We say they were ahead of their time. They created the model that other people after them followed. And like, there's no higher praise than to say this guy did something new and then everybody else followed after it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's
But
like,
to my point, I think that's an unnatural state. And
Yeah.
that's the state that all of the West is in.
and that might be a fair way of putting it. At the same time, though, like, there's something about Christianity that supersedes those other things. So, like, I guess I'm not really prepared to go into detail on that. There's some bold claims that I want to make there, but I don't want to make them without the receipts. So I'll be short with that. But still, just going with what you said, like that's still very important. It's like, hey, look at the Christianity, dear listener, that you've got, and like, where did it come from? Like, really ask yourself, where did it come from?
And that's a very important question, what you just said there, David, because that's the question that I started asking myself. That's the question all three of us have started asking. And if you want to take an honest look at where the Christianity you hold to comes from, and if at the same time you want to take into account the last 2,000 years of Christian history as well, start to kind of shake a little bit, because there's so many things that we hold so closely to today that are so shallowly recent in history, and are from people that no one even knows who they are. And yeah, it's just kind of like, oh dear. And it goes back to what you've just been saying, John, about Western culture. It's like,
Yeah, but it's like, I almost want to say something. No, you can correct me, both of you, if this seems like it's not right. But
well,
like,
you're definitely wrong.
I almost want to say to my fellow Christians, try to discredit your own beliefs, because if you can, they're not real. Because I think, like, you got to be careful, but like, you can't discredit authentic Christianity. You know, I guess if we're speaking in Christian terms, like, the demons have been trying to discredit Moses and the prophets and Jesus Christ and the apostles, like, from the beginning of time, and they've never been able to do it. But that doesn't mean that the Christianity that I have is the same thing. And one way to test that, like, what I'm describing here is kind of like my own my own religious pursuit. Is like, I need to put my own beliefs to the test. And I think a lot of us are generally taught, well, that's a lack of faith. Like, no, I think actual faith means that I do put it to the test, because what's real and what's true will stand. And like the truth is something that has, like, it's something that's real and has actual power. And like what I wind up finding, and maybe this is the reason that we actually don't do it if we're honest with ourselves, is that when you do that, a lot of what you think is true is going to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not pleasant. And when you're left in a place where the things that you hold dear don't hold up, then it's like, it's the unknown, but it's like crisis.
Well, to bring this down to maybe more, not necessarily religious terms, although to some people I think it is a religion, bring this into the political scene and situation in our country right now as we near a presidential election, is if you take a good, honest, hard look at things as somebody with everything that's going on and what people actually say and what they actually do, you can kind of pretty quickly see that things usually are not as if they seem usually, and they're not quite what they seem to be or what most people are saying they are. And that is very hard for some people to accept. That is very hard to accept that, well, and this goes back to our talk of Western culture and things, is that you have to be able to choose one side or the other. And that's kind of a pretty destructive way of doing things. And
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, but I'm just kind of relaying that as an example of what David just gave, is that if people would really take a good hard look at things, the political scene would calm down quite a bit, and we might actually get some pretty decent people, in front of us. But if you don't do a decent job yourself of looking into things, the results aren't very decent anyway.
Well, I'm just of the opinion that populist politics is a bad idea.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I'll go back to a point you made a little while ago, because you were talking about institutions, religious groups specifically, and if they go bad, that it seemed to be like you're saying there's no coming back, there's no recovering. And I think that there's, I don't know, I mean, in a sense, like a fallen angel isn't going to be redeemed.
mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like there's something that seems false about writing off, like once corruption enters, then the whole institution is no good, because then your only option is revolution, and revolution is probably going to get you something a lot worse than what you're rebelling against to begin with.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe that's my Western way of dealing with, if there's an irredeemable institution, then what do you do about it? And revolution is, if it's irredeemable, if it really was irredeemable, revolution would be the only option.
Yeah, so I think you have a symbol that illustrates this in the scripture, which is like God's approach to the, I guess you would say, the pagan and Gentile institutions that existed. So like Christianity did not come along and just obliterate pagan cultures and replace them with Jewish culture or Christian culture. I mean, because that's actually a thing that never existed. Instead, the image that you have, like in Isaiah and in the New Testament, is cutting off the dead branches from the tree that bear no fruit and casting them into the fire, and then taking these other branches
Mm-hmm.
from like
Yeah.
the wild trees and grafting them on. Like you have to graft them on to the root.
Right.
Like that's the image. It's like you have the root
Mhm.
that is, then that's like think of the root as the source of life.
Yeah.
So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is the only way I'm going to bring life to this thorn bush over here is to graft it on to the source of life.
Yeah, so to get in practical terms, we'll talk about Protestantism and denominations and all that in just a second. But when I look at the problems in public education, then I look at this as a system that cannot heal itself, and I think that there will one day be a kind of restoration of public education, and that it's not going to come from some sort of internal reform of public education, but it's
Right.
going to be. I mean, I don't want to specifically point the finger at something like private schools or classical Christian education or micro schools or homeschool pods or whatever. I'm like people are trying out all these different solutions, and somebody is going to come up with something that works so much better than the system that we have right now, and is also can be implemented at scale in public schools. And when we have that, then you take that branch and you graft it on, or you cut out the dead
Right.
stuff in public schooling, and you adopt these other things. Like, I think what that means for me is that public education is redeemable, and there are lots of things that are going to be cut off, and the thing that's going to be grafted on is going to come from some wild place.
Well, I actually would say it a different way, which is like, I think, so like ancient Christians understood this, is that the thing, like no matter what it is that you're cutting off and grafting onto something, it's always the same thing that you're grafting it onto, and that's the church. So it's like the answer, like the reason education has fallen is because it was cut off from the root and grafted onto this secular plant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Being kind of loose with my analogies. But
Yeah. Right.
I think it fits. It's
Yeah.
like that's actually the problem. So it's now been grafted onto a diseased root
Mm-hmm.
that there's not any life in it. So it's shriveling up and dying.
Right.
It's like, well, the answer is to graft it back on. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's another angle to look at this. It was like with the Anabaptist tradition that we all come from, is that how and when is that 500-year tradition going to have the first 1,500 years of the church grafted back into it?
Well,
Because
it's not. And that's, I guess, ultimately what I'm trying to, well, like, how I'm looking at it is, you can't do that.
yeah,
You
I
can't
don't-
graft the 1,500 years back into this. Instead, you have to take this and graft it back onto the 1,500 years.
Right. And then I think you're right. And I think that is the question for us from the Anabaptist tradition, and either, part of it or formally part of it, that we need to ask ourselves. And a good pastor friend that I know from the Anabaptist tradition, he's still an Anabaptist minister, he has made the comment to me, and he has made the comment to his congregation, is that, I'm sorry, we can't just include only our 500 years of tradition. We're missing the previous 1,500 years of church tradition, and we have to include it, or we don't. We miss out. And he's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the question staring us in the face as Anabaptists. And I will still call myself an Anabaptist, by the way, because I am. I was raised as an Anabaptist. I grew up in the
It's like,
tradition.
it's our culture. It's,
Yeah.
it'll always be a major part of, like your identity is, it's being shaped your whole life, but it's shaped by all of those things.
Right. Right. So the question we ask ourselves is, and I think the pruning process that's been described here, I believe the pruning process is going on within the Anabaptist culture, and it will continue to go on until we open ourselves up to what God would have us be part of again.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion. I don't know, maybe we're hurting the analogy too hard for people.
I think we might be.
But it's like there's a pruning process going on, but it's like, but nobody knows what do we graft ourselves onto?
Yeah, and like, do
Um,
you wind up like going too far and cutting off the branch that you're sitting on?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what you just
Yeah,
said
so,
there,
so
John,
a
is
lot of
what.
our goal originally was how do we find a type of unity
Mhm.
or a type of communion between Anabaptists and Orthodox, or between our own tradition, or you
Right.
could just say our own tradition and the broader Christian tradition.
Right.
And if and I can't speak in a way that's condemning of you guys, because I'm not at a Mennonite church and I haven't been, and you guys have been more recently than me. But
Yeah, they kicked him out a long time ago.
well, sort of. No, nobody kicked me out, but I was actually just too interested in my own local church's traditions for the interest of the people at my own local church, which is a little
Weird.
different. Yeah, right.
But it makes a lot of sense if you're a Mennonite.
Yeah, right. But they didn't kick me out either. But that was the nature of the conflict. Anyways, now I've got distracted from what I was actually trying to say. Boy, I don't know. Can you knocked me off the track? Can you
Oh, we were
back
talking
on it?
about our original goal. Of,
Yeah.
You know, can we like reunite with the
Okay,
broader
okay.
church? And
Yeah, so if we scatter to the four corners of the earth, then those communities that we are a part of continue to break down.
Yeah.
And there's just less and less there that can be incorporated into something bigger.
Yeah, and it's like, how are we? Like, I think this escapes most people because we've learned as Americans to look at things individually, like in
Mhm.
this very individualistic way. And like, you know, it's kind of become the American Christianity now to say like, well, the point of Christianity is you're a child of God and you're being made a child of God. And the point of Christianity is your salvation. It's like, no, the point of Christianity is the salvation of the whole world. But, you know, like that plays out at every single level simultaneously. So if you're neglecting any level of that hierarchy, you're neglecting the whole thing. So like what I'm saying is, I can't be saved, like my salvation isn't working out if I'm just only focused on myself and my own salvation. And at the same time, I'm also not doing any good for the rest of the world if I'm neglecting my own salvation. So it's like those things, I don't know, it's a mystery, but I hope this makes sense. It's like, that's the thing that's, anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is that your Christianity can't possibly work on all of those levels if it just keeps breaking up. Because how are you going to redeem the institutions around you? Like we're talking about education. How are you going to have any answers to the problems in education if, you know, you're dealing with a huge institution, but your institutions are just in shambles? It's like this, and you know, this is part of the thought process that leads me to realizing it's like, no, the church has to be an institution that exists on earth. It can't be this teaching of, oh, it's the invisible church that's just all true believers are united spiritually into the church, but it's not an organization with you know, actual buildings and people and leadership and hierarchies and all that. That's just some kind of.
Well, yeah, that would suggest that there is no body to the church, and if there's no body, then it can't do things.
Yeah, right. And I mean, that's a very simple way of putting it, but a very good way of putting it.
Yeah.
But then, so like we're talking about how this actually works out in your world. It's like, hey, we somehow bought into that way of thinking in American Christianity en masse, and it just became like the default ecclesiology in America. It's like, oh, there's, you know, the church is a spiritual thing and not an institution. It's like, well, how's that worked out for America? So now look at America. America is institutionally in shambles.
Yeah.
And, you know, like you were talking about politics earlier, and I made a little bit of a comment, and I guess following up on that, it's like, man, as a Christian, and I want to be careful how I say this, as a Christian, I increasingly look at things as that American politics is anti-Christ because it is so divisive and there's like no hope of any kind of unity. But where did that start? Where did that come from? It's like we don't see our culture as functionally a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, that's because bad theology led the way.
Yeah. Well, and there's not going to be political unity
Right.
while there is disunity within the church.
Right.
The theological battles that people fight
Yeah.
they're split along red and blue lines.
Right, and like to be clear, like unity in the church doesn't mean that you agree on everything.
Mm-hmm.
It means you are united in one body, sharing of the same cup, sharing of the same meal together.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what it really functionally means, and like that's definitely not what we're doing. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. This is an interesting direction this conversation has gone from, but I guess it makes sense to me. Like me and Aaron's experience has led to ecclesiology.
Yeah, right.
But for me, like I say that's fitting because for me, like that's actually like the center of my own process. It's like, hey, these ecclesiology, it turns out, is pretty important, actually.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this conversation resulted from me responding to your
Right.
rationale for your personal situation.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know, with that in mind, then maybe as we start to wrap things up, then we can consider, is there anything else that we want to bring back to the personal side of the discussion?
I wanted to say one thing, and this is to address some of the experiences that I had personally, and I think it fits to some of Aaron's experience too. I don't believe that any of the people, like I could sit here and say people mistreated me and said bad things about me and go on and on about that if I wanted to. Part of the reason I don't want to is because it characterizes those people as bad people. And I don't think the people that I had experiences with, the people that Aaron had experiences with, are bad people. Or that these people have bad motives and bad intentions. Or that they are not sincere in their Christian faith. What I do think is that bad theology causes good people to do bad things. And that's like a real lesson that I've drawn from my own experience, but I want others to learn from, is that theology actually is important. Like that's another thing that's happened in American Christianity is like, oh, theology, that's not what's important. Your relationship with Jesus Christ is what's important. It's like, yes, that's true, but let's make sure you're relating to the actual Jesus Christ. Let's make sure you're relating to the actual Godhead and not a false construct that you've come up with somewhere along the line. Because it turns out that has dire, severe consequences for your faith, your spirit. And like it plays itself out.
Using the term body in a similar way to what I did before, the church is the body of Christ.
Right.
Like if you're seeking to have a good, personal one-on-one relationship with Jesus Christ, then what role does the body of Christ play in that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You have to be part of that body.
Well, it's like I used to think when I was younger that the ecumenical councils, and I was kind of taught this, the ecumenical councils were like, these people are like getting in arguments over stupid technicalities. And these aren't the things that actually matter. And as I would characterize it as I've actually cultivated a relationship with the real God. I've come to realize, no, the ecumenical councils were discussing the things that actually matter, and we're caught up in all of the things that are stupid, and oftentimes things that we're just making up, and like we're missing the actual point. Like the actual point is God is real, and Christ is real, and Jesus is an actual person. And like, when I start getting off track on those things, it has real consequences. And I guess just like encouraging people, like the trend in American Christianity, or really the Protestant way of thinking, but this is like spread to non-Protestant traditions as well, has been like your soteriology or your doctrine, or your how you do this thing or that. Those are the things that actually matter in Christianity, or all of these other things that we put our emphasis on. It's like, no, what really matters is that you worship the real God in the way that He gave us. That's like, I don't know, I don't want to go too far down that, but like this is, I don't know, relating to my personal experiences, like coming to grips with that, is that this goes back to my own experience of, hey, the way we're doing things doesn't work. And part of the reason it doesn't work is because we're looking at all of the wrong things. And so we miss the actual answer. Like the actual answer is the real actual person, Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, I guess I would say, on the personal side of things, just the final note I would add is just please pray for us.
Mm-hmm.
Pray for David as he begins this journey, soon to be a catechumen. Pray for me and my fiance and my family, and pray for John and his family as well. We want to continue to seek the Lord, and we want to continue to draw closer to that ancient Christianity.
Now, I don't know if you wanted to I don't even know if you have anything personal to say, but I guess it's only fair if we can give you the opportunity.
Well, first I'll say something that's not all that personal in reference to grafting. We were talking about that before, but since we were talking so abstractly and analogically, and
I felt like I had a pretty concrete illustration. Aaron just messed it all up.
Aaron made the comment about how do you take that ancient tradition and graft that onto the Mennonite tradition, and you said, well, you can't do that. You do it the other way around.
Right.
But in relation to that, like as far as what does that mean? Because that's all analogical. No, you don't have to answer. I just want to make a comment here.
Yeah, my answer would be, we're going to have to just do a whole different video.
No. My only thought in there that I wanted to add to the conversation since it came up was that one way that you could think of that difference would be that if you are willing to go back to the ancient sources and let that shape you, then that means you're taking yourself or your tradition or what, like you're grafting onto the ancient root.
Yeah.
And if you go the other way around, which is you go to the ancient sources in order to prove how they support you, then you're doing the opposite thing.
Right.
You're trying to graft that onto your.
Well, and I feel like that's kind of maybe the mistake that I might have been making along the way, is that, and I don't know, maybe for us too, even as a podcast, a little bit along the way, is we were trying to prove how it proved our own tradition rather than realizing, that it was the other way around too. Like I can say that for myself in some ways, that might have had it a little bit backwards.
I remember a comment on one of our videos, like concerning our initial, it wasn't our initial, but I guess you would say as a podcast visit to an Orthodox service. Like somebody made a comment, something along the lines of, guys, you can't try to reinvent the church. You're going to have to realize that the church is already here. And I remember at the time thinking like, oh, this is just some Orthodox jerk is just being like, no, we're the good guys. Like, and saying it in like a mean-spirited sort of way. And I would say I've come to realize that, similar to what Aaron was saying, like what I wanted to accomplish, it turns out is not something that can actually be accomplished, at least not in the way I was trying to do it. Like I'm not trying to say Mennonites are beyond redemption. But I guess I am saying, like, we're not going to reinvent the church. And we also don't need to. How that works out for you personally or your institution, I think winds up being a whole long series of steps. And there might be different ways of going about this path. But for me personally, where I stand today, I'm convinced that all of those paths end up leading to the same place. And it might be a long journey, and it might be unadvisable. Like I wouldn't sit here and say, well, you just need to throw out your traditions and your church and your everything that you have and just, go join an Orthodox church. That's probably not advisable in most cases. But how that plays out, I guess I don't have the answer. I could speculate, but that's probably not wise or healthy.
Yeah.
Okay, then I will make a couple of personal comments only because you asked, because I don't know that it's that relevant to the discussion. But at the church that David and I grew up at, you could summarize briefly by saying the conservative majority left the church because of a growing theological liberalism. Mm-hmm. And my parents left, or our parents left the church, while I was in college. And I came back later as an adult, and I was involved in like a transition committee, and they were trying to figure out a lot of questions of what direction is the church going to take from here, because they'd fallen apart so much and they'd lost so many people. They're trying to figure out, what do we do? It seems like we're doing something wrong. We need to get back on track somehow, but what is the track? And I was strongly advocating for leaving the conference that we were a part of, which I guess still we have this problem of like, there's a problem in the institution, so leave it. Leave that institution.
Right.
But that's what I was pushing for. And when the church took a vote on it, they changed the whole business protocol of the church so that this minority would guarantee to get the result that they wanted. And just, I mean, I don't know if this, you could say that maybe a democratic approach isn't the way to run a church anyways, but Mennonites have a pretty democratic approach to making leadership to making decisions. And especially with a decision like that, that's something you take a vote on as a congregation, but you have a business meeting and you discuss it, and there's debate that's going on amongst not the entire congregation, but everybody in the congregation that's interested enough to stick around after church.
Right.
And so they did it before church with the whole congregation there, and did not allow for any discussion as a part of it. And Dad had told me that even though they are saying, before the vote came around, even though they're saying that they want dialogue, in the end, they're just going to push through what they want. And
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what I did. Like I say, they invented a new church protocol so that they could get the result that they wanted. And there was another controversial decision that they made shortly afterward, which I won't get into a lot right here, but that caused a lot of people to leave, and I kind of left with the big crowd that was on the way out. Although my reasons were a little bit different than the reasons for a lot of people. I felt like I represent a certain perspective, and the perspective that I represent is not welcome here. So then I wound up following in our parents' footsteps and, just making the decision on my own that I'm leaving that church. And I haven't attended an Anabaptist church since that time, and that's been 10 or 11 years ago, I suppose.
Except for mine, you came to my church.
Well, it's not like I won't step in the building, no.
But you didn't you mean regularly?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But in spite of not being a member of an Anabaptist church, like I made very clear to my pastor at my church, I'm a Mennonite, and I'm here as a Mennonite, and this is the perspective that I will bring into our conversations when we talk. So I've just kind of, for a lot of when I went off to college, I don't know if I should say for a lot of my life, but when I went to college, then I was sort of trying to figure out, is it possible to be a Mennonite if you're not part of a Mennonite community? Because there's something about it that is very not individualistic, and that is very much about being a part of the community. And I kind of thought, like, it's not really possible. And as years went by, then I came to this other. You made a similar comment about yourself in this regard, about you will be Mennonites. That's our culture.
Right.
But I came to this opposite perspective of what I had originally, which was that, oh yeah, actually I can't ever not be a Mennonite.
Right. Well, it's like, if I would move to another country and I would, learn the language and integrate into the culture and live the way of life, I'd still be an American.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's similar to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so that's but there's no new updates for me.
Yeah.
This is
Right.
more than a decade in the past.
Well, there's a lot of interesting points that the whole thing brought up, but
Yeah.
I think
mean,
we've gone pretty long, and long videos make big files.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we thank you for joining us again. We appreciate all of you that follow us and listen to the podcast, watch the videos. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for participating in the conversation as always. We love the conversation. We've made some good friends because of the conversation. That's probably one of the most special parts of all this, is the friends that the Lord has brought into our lives because of it. And we say hello to all of you out there. You all know who you are. And the Lord bless you all, and we wish peace to you all and peace in Christ.